Are you crazy? That's what friends said to me when they'd heard that I'd booked on the cruise line that I am on right now. I did it anyway because I was intrigued to find out if cruising on a line where you have to be over 50 is any different from the multitude of cruises I've done in the last few years, where by default the passengers were mostly over 50 anyway, because that's basically most of the people who cruise and the cruise lines that I normally go on. So is this any different? Well, yes, it turned out to be different in ways I hadn't expected at all. But importantly, I also discovered 3 really simple and very, very practical things that you should do and I should do if you're looking at going on a new cruise line. I should have done this before I chose this cruise. It would have made things so very different. If you're new here, welcome aboard. I'm Gary Bembridge, and my goal is to make it much more fun and really much easier to discover, plan, and enjoy unforgettable cruise vacations. This was unforgettable, and let's find out why. The first thing that worried me about going on this particular cruise line, Saga, which targets the over 50, was who are the ships designed for? What is the look and feel? Is it going to be very old-fashioned, very fuddy-duddy, and very traditional? Because we've seen other lines that have a large percentage of over 50 travelers bringing on something much more contemporary and modern. So even Holland America with their new ships, Celebrity certainly with their revamps, Oceania with their upgrades, they're bringing a much more contemporary look and feel. Well, I shouldn't have been worried, because when I stepped on board, I found something very unexpected. It looked very much kind of like a sort of more modern contemporary boutique hotel. So the designer decor certainly wasn't old-fashioned at all. It was very contemporary, with artwork dotted around the place, which was also pretty contemporary, modern, and pretty out there in many ways. The ships are very new ships. So Spirit of Discovery that I'm on came into service in 2019. Spirit of Adventure, the sister ship, only came into service in 2021. So certainly the look and the feel and the design of the ship was very contemporary. So that certainly was a big surprise. It was not something that I had expected. As I explored the ship, I found, of course, you had all the facilities, all the venues that you'd normally expect to find on a ship, no matter who they're catering for. So you had lots of bars, the South Cape Bar, the living room, the big Britannia Lounge. You had, of course, theatres, all that kind of stuff that you'd expect. But also, importantly, there was lots of fitness activity centres as well. So you had a good-sized fitness centre. You had a swimming pool, which is actually a pretty good-sized swimming pool. You have a massive big spa area. You have outdoor deck game areas. You even had a golf simulator. So lots of activity-focused facilities as well. When it came to the cabins, again, found those pretty contemporary and modern as well, with all the usual things you'd expect. So USB chargers, interactive television. So it certainly wasn't as old and fuddy-duddy as I perhaps thought it would be when I was using my stereotypical view of a company that might be catering for an older passenger. There were, however, a couple of nods to that slightly older demographic which they lay down. So for example, if you take a look at the swimming pool, there was a special kind of slow staggered entry system in, so you get in and out the pool very easily. 20% of the cabins on the ship are solo cabins, again reflecting that many people in their demographic are cruising solo. The fare included some things which probably also are very much liked by an older demographic. So it had things like transfers to and from your home included. Insurance was included, which included even COVID cover. And I guess that may be talking to a demographic who is even skewing even older, that may struggle to get insurance for cruising. The other thing, though, that did strike me is the lack of focus really on technology. So Wi-Fi is included in the fare. The fares are all pretty all-inclusive. However, the Wi-Fi was not that good. So, for example, you couldn't really use a lot of social media. So I couldn't use things like Twitter. I couldn't use Instagram very well. You certainly couldn't stream YouTube. And that felt to me like not really focusing on the demographic. I had loads of people coming up to me on the cruise who watch the channel, so are YouTube watchers. They see things on Facebook. They talk to their kids and grandkids on FaceTime, but you couldn't really do that on the Wi-Fi. So that was probably one area that hadn't really reflected the people like me who are in my early 60s, who are very active on Wi-Fi, digital, and that wasn't really catered for as well as it could be. So there came my first really big aha moment. The first big, simple, practical tip is make sure before you go on any new cruise line And any new ship, you check out in a huge amount of detail exactly what is on the ship. So you check out the kind of hardware, what the facilities are, but also check out the software and some of the reviews on things, whether it's important to you, like say Wi-Fi, or it is the fitness center, or whatever it is. So spend some time studying the deck plans, spend some time looking at reviews, and certainly spend some time looking at ship tours that you can find very easily on things like YouTube. If I'd followed that simple tip, I would have realized, for example, that one key facility and thing that I like to do on a cruise is not on Saga and not on the Spirit of Discovery. And that is that there is no casino. When I'm on a cruise, I do like to have a bit of flutter and play the machines or play a bit of blackjack. Once I was on board and I realized that was the case, that did start to get me worried a little bit around, does that mean that the activities and the daily program and the things to do on board are also not going to really talk to me as a cruise passenger? As I started to look at the daily program and look at the plan of events, I could see that it was a pretty classic cruise experience, pretty much as I've experienced on Celebrity, Holland America, Princess, and those kind of cruise lines. So pretty classical. Dress code, for example, was in place, as it is on most of those other cruise lines where you have a majority of passengers by definition are over 50. So there was a smart casual evening where you're expected to wear kind of, as a gentleman, a collared shirt of some kind. I tended to wear long sleeve shirts, sort of smart slacks, no jeans. And then they did have kind of a formal gala night where a lot of people, as I discovered on this cruise, would go the full hog and wear a dinner jacket or a tuxedo, and ladies would wear the most remarkable gowns. But that wasn't that different to my experience on other cruise lines, so I'd kind of expected that was going to happen. The daily program had the usual fare of quizzes, deck games, enrichment, cooking demonstrations. The shows were again fairly similar. They were kind of review type shows focusing on different decades, song and dance type material. They had guest artists, comedians, guest singers from famous bands, West End, that kind of stuff. So the actual overall program was pretty much the same. So what was clear is a cruise line that requires you to be 50 or over has pretty much the same structure, the same dress code, the same daily program activities as those more traditional cruise lines or mainstream cruise lines like Princess, Holland America, Celebrity, that don't have kind of a specific age target, but tend to have that kind of traveler on board. The other question I had is around dining. Would I have the diversity and the range and the choice of innovative food options that I would have on those other cruise lines? Or would Saga actually have a much more conservative, traditional approach to dining options? What I found was I should not have worried, because they had quite a wide range of dining. So you had your usual, your buffet and your main dining room with big menus as you have on those other cruise lines. They also had 3 specialty dining restaurants. They had one which was a steakhouse called the Club with Jules. They had East to West, which was kind of an Asian fusion restaurant, so pretty innovative. Then they had Coast to Coast, which is mostly a seafood restaurant, again with kind of a wide range and very innovative food. So I shouldn't have worried. A cruise line targeting people over 50, Saga, it definitely had a diverse range there. The other area that I was less sure about is excursions, because I certainly like to do excursions which are a little bit more on the active side. So I'll always go for the cycling excursion, for example, or if there's whitewater rafting or some kind of hike up a volcano or something like that. So I like things that are much more in that area. So my concern was, would Saga have excursions which were much more sedentary, much less out there, if you like? And in reality, the answer was probably skewing a little bit towards that. So there was panoramic excursions, for example, kind of much more bus-driven, focused excursions. They did, though, have some excursions which were kind of more hikes and walks, but not really out there pushing you kind of excursions. So excursions, I would say, definitely leaned a little bit more on the conservative side than some other cruise lines. Of course, the advantage you have is in port, you can go and do your own thing. You can do independent excursions. So that probably counterbalanced that. But certainly on the table, on the offerings, I would say the excursions were probably a little bit more sedentary, a little bit more conservative than I personally would normally have enjoyed, and I sometimes get offered on those other cruise lines. There's a really big focus on art, on history, on culture and food. So I definitely think when you got to the excursion side, there was more of a nod to the demographic. There are other couple little touches where we saw kind of, again, a nod to the demographic. So for example, when you got off the excursion, one of the Saga sort of signatures is they offer you a Werther's Original Suite, which for those of you who don't know it, it's a very traditional suite, and a lot of the advertising, for example, talks about grandparents sharing it with their grandkids. So little touches like that, probably more of a nod to the demographic. Another nod to the demographic was we had a couple of ports where you had to get on the tenders. We had to get on those little tender boats to take you to the shore. And we had to all go into a step test to show that we were agile and mobile enough to actually step off the ship onto a tender. Now, that was something that I haven't seen on other cruise lines. So the program itself was pretty conservative and fairly traditional. And that brought up, for me, the second really big practical and simple tip if you're looking at moving to a new cruise line. And that is to not just read the reviews, but to actually look at the daily program. So one of the things I've seen around is people will often keep the daily program. They might post a blog about it. But one of the things I realized is what you should do is actually ask people who've been on that cruise line if they've kept the daily program and can you look at it. If I'd looked at the daily program, I would have got a really good sense about what the entertainment was, what the activities were, and the nature of those activities. That for me is a really big tip. If I'd followed that particular tip and looked at the daily program for this cruise line and this ship, I would have seen on the daily program in the Britannia Lounge every evening for quite some hours was a live band and ballroom dancing. There was going to be no kind of nightclub, no silent disco, none of that kind of activity. And that probably would have flagged the type of people who were going to be on board. Clearly people, and a lot of people, who enjoy ballroom dancing, which by definition probably means skewing a little bit older. Now, my background is marketing. And one of the things I learned in marketing is if you put an age on something, you can pretty much guarantee that people 15, 20 years above that are going to buy your product. So if you say 40, you can expect people like me in their early 60s to buy it. What I found on board is, in reality, most of the passengers, I would say, were probably in the 65 to 75 year age group. So definitely me in my early 60s was on the younger side. And I think really what my experience was is that is really the heart of the Saga Traveller. That is where they cater for the best. Those are the people who are definitely happiest on board, and the daily program and the ship and all the activities really satisfied that group probably more than anybody else. That brings me to my next really simple and practical tip, and that's by looking at the ship, looking at the daily program, is figure out what the real sweet spot for a cruise line is. Now on Saga it's very easy because it is very much more age driven. However, for every cruise line you can pretty much figure that out. So are they going after the fun-loving party goer carnival? Are they looking for the more international loving, multicultural loving families, which could be MSC? So try and figure out who the cruise line is really zeroing in on, who they want to keep most happy, and decide, is that for you? Of course, all these cruise lines you're going to have fun on anyway because of the destinations, the food, the facilities and that kind of stuff. But if you really want to find the ideal cruise line, or the cruise line that you know is going to work when you jump into a new cruise line from one you're really familiar with, really focus on who is the sweet spot and see if you fit within that. And I think you can pretty much tell that by looking at the ship, looking at the facilities, and by looking at the daily program. If you think Saga is the sort of cruise line that could be right for you because it's in your sweet spot, click on this video here where I break down Saga in much more detail, including one of the things that they do particularly well that other cruise lines don't do well. So click on that and I'll see you over there right now.